Hey guys, tonight we're diving into medieval times. But here's something that'll keep you up. She woke up at dawn and by sunset, she'd already survived 3 things that would probably kill you before breakfast. What made simply being a medieval woman more dangerous than a modern extreme sport? You're about to discover the shocking daily routine that made medieval women tougher than Navy SEALs. And trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll understand why your worst Monday doesn't even compare to their average Tuesday. Every morning started with a gamble. Would the straw you slept on give you lice, fleas, or something worse crawling into your ears while you dreamed? But here's what'll blow your mind. These women actually lived longer than you'd expect, and some historians argue they were healthier than Victorian ladies who had modern medicine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing where this medieval journey takes us around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're jolting awake to the sound of church bells clanging through the pre-dawn darkness. But it's not the bells that make you wince. It's the sharp straw poking through your thin mattress, and something small and many-legged scurrying across your neck. Welcome to your medieval morning, where your bed is basically a wildlife sanctuary you're forced to sleep in. The rooster's crow echoes from the courtyard below. But you're already wide awake because, let's be honest, medieval beds weren't exactly designed for comfort. Your straw mattress, which seemed reasonable when you stuffed it last autumn, has now compressed into something resembling a lumpy pancake filled with the dreams and droppings of various small creatures. You shift carefully, trying not to disturb whatever ecosystem has developed in your bedding overnight. The air in your chamber is thick and cold, carrying the scent of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and something vaguely organic that you've learned not to investigate too closely. Your breath creates small puffs of vapor in the frigid air, and you can hear the wind whistling through gaps in the wooden shutters that were supposed to keep the elements out but seem more like suggestions than actual barriers. Your sleeping chamber, if you can call it that, is a testament to medieval ingenuity and desperation. The walls are rough-hewn timber, chinked with whatever mud and straw mixture was available when your house was built. There's a single window, shuttered against the night, but even closed, it lets in enough draft to keep a small flag flying. The floor beneath your feet is nothing more than packed earth, covered with rushes that were fresh sometime last month and now crunch ominously underfoot. The bed frame itself is a marvel of medieval engineering, and by marvel, I mean it's held together by rope, hope, and the occasional prayer. The wooden frame creaks with every movement, and you've learned to distribute your weight carefully to avoid the spot near your left shoulder where one of the support ropes has stretched to the point of surrender. Your pillow, stuffed with whatever feathers could be spared from last year's goose slaughter, has developed a suspicious flatness that suggests the feathers have either escaped or died of old age. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually slept worse than modern insomniacs. But one thing's certain, your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Your hip bones feel like they've been grinding against stone all night, and there's a crick in your neck that suggests you spent the evening wrestling with your pillow rather than resting on it. But here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean terrifying. That straw mattress you're lying on isn't just uncomfortable. It's a biological hazard that would make a modern health inspector weep. Medieval people knew that straw needed to be changed regularly, but regularly, in the 14th century meant when it starts moving on its own. Your mattress is home to fleas, lice, bed bugs, mites, and probably several species of small rodents who've set up permanent residence in the cozy straw suburbs of your sleeping arrangements. The fleas alone are worth a mention here. Medieval fleas weren't just annoying, they were potential harbingers of death. These weren't your garden variety pet fleas. These were plague-carrying, disease-spreading, medieval super fleas that could turn a good night's sleep into a one-way ticket to the afterlife. And you're sharing your bed with thousands of them. Remember, this isn't just any morning, this is every morning. There's no weekend lie-in, no snooze button, no gentle wake-up light gradually brightening your room. The medieval world operates on a schedule set by the sun, the church, and the very real possibility that if you don't get moving soon, you might not eat today. You can hear stirring from other parts of the house, the soft shuffle of feet on wooden floors, the creak of rope beds as other family members begin their own reluctant emergence from sleep. Someone's already moving around downstairs, probably your mother-in-law, who seems to possess the supernatural ability to function before dawn without the aid of coffee, which won't be invented for several more centuries. The sounds of the awakening household create a symphony of medieval morning misery. There's the distinctive sound of someone hacking up whatever they inhaled during the night, probably smoke from the poorly ventilated hearth downstairs. You hear the scrape of wooden bowls being moved around, the soft thud of feet on ladder rungs as someone climbs down from the loft, and the unmistakable sound of someone relieving themselves in what you desperately hope is the designated chamber pot. But here's a quirky detail that might surprise you. Medieval people were actually quite particular about their sleeping arrangements, at least by their standards. Wealthy households had specific rules about who slept where, and bed sharing was both a practical necessity and a complex social ritual. You might be sharing your bed with sisters, servants, or visiting relatives, all arranged according to strict hierarchies of age, status, and body heat distribution. The reality hits you as you lie there, gathering courage to face the day. You're about to embark on a routine so physically demanding, so fraught with genuine danger, and so relentlessly exhausting that it would make a modern survival show look like a spa retreat. And the kicker? This isn't a challenge you signed up for. This is just Tuesday. Your feet hit the cold wooden floor, and you immediately regret every life choice that led to this moment, including being born in the 14th century. The rushes beneath your feet are damp with condensation and whatever else has accumulated there over the weeks, creating a squishy, unpleasant sensation that reminds you why medieval people had such interesting relationships with hygiene. The first thing you need to do is stumble through your morning prayers, but here's the catch. You're doing it while your bladder screams for relief and your teeth chatter from the cold. Medieval devotion wasn't just about spiritual salvation. It was about surviving the night and hoping God noticed your dedication despite the fact that you're mentally calculating how long you can hold it before disaster strikes. You drop to your knees on the cold floor, the rushes crunching beneath you as you clasp your hands together, and begin the familiar Latin words that you've memorized but don't entirely understand. Pater noster qui es in caelis. You mumble, but your mind is racing through a completely different set of priorities. Your bladder is sending increasingly urgent signals. There's a draft coming from somewhere that's making your shift cling to your skin like a damp shroud, and you're pretty sure something just scurried across your foot. The morning prayer routine is non-negotiable in medieval society. Every good Christian woman begins her day by acknowledging God's mercy in allowing her to survive another night, And honestly, given the mortality rates, this isn't just religious formality, it's genuine gratitude. You rattle through the Ave Maria, the Credo, and whatever other prayers your mother drilled into you, all while doing a little dance that you hope looks like religious fervor but is actually your body's desperate attempt to maintain dignity. But here's where medieval morning devotion gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean it reveals just how practical medieval people were about their spirituality. Your prayers aren't just rote recitation, they're a mental checklist of everything that could go wrong today. You're praying for protection from fire, flood, famine, plague, bandits, wolves, and that suspicious-looking boil that appeared on your sister's neck last week. Medieval prayers were basically comprehensive insurance policies delivered in Latin. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more genuinely devout or just more terrified of divine retribution, but one thing's certain: nobody skipped morning prayers. The consequences of angering God in a world where medical care consisted of bloodletting and herbal tea were simply too dire to risk. Your eternal soul might be at stake, but more immediately, your daily survival depended on staying in the Almighty's good graces. Now, about that bladder situation. You've finished your prayers, but the real challenge is just beginning. Medieval bathroom etiquette was a complex dance of privacy, practicality, and sheer desperation. Your options are limited. There's the chamber pot in the corner, which hasn't been emptied since yesterday and is developing its own ecosystem. Or you can brave the trip to the outdoor privy, which involves navigating a dark house, potentially waking other family members, and facing whatever creatures have taken up residence in the latrine overnight. The chamber pot seems like the obvious choice, but here's a fun medieval fact. These weren't just simple ceramic bowls. Wealthy households had elaborate chamber pots made of pewter or even silver, often decorated with family crests or religious symbols. Because nothing says, "I'm important," quite like having your coat of arms on your toilet. Your family's chamber pot is more practical, a simple clay vessel that's seen better days and makes suspicious sloshing sounds when you move it. But here's the quirky detail that'll make you appreciate modern plumbing. Medieval chamber pots were often shared among family members. That's right, you're not just dealing with your own waste. You're contributing to a communal collection that someone, probably you, will have to empty later. The etiquette around chamber pot usage was surprisingly complex, involving rules about who could use it when, how full it could get before emptying became mandatory, and the proper way to clean it afterward. The alternative, the outdoor privy, presents its own set of medieval challenges. First, you have to navigate your way through a house that's darker than a modern person can imagine. There are no night lights, no glowing digital clocks, no ambient light from street lamps filtering through windows. Medieval darkness is absolute, complete, and filled with obstacles that seem to multiply in the dark. You're feeling your way along walls, trying to avoid the loose floorboard that creaks loud enough to wake the dead, and hoping you don't step on the cat. Assuming you make it outside without breaking your neck, the privy itself is an adventure in medieval engineering. It's basically a wooden shed built over a pit, with a bench featuring strategically placed holes. The smell alone could knock a modern person unconscious, and the flies have established a thriving civilization that views your arrival as either a threat or an opportunity. In winter, the experience becomes even more delightful as frost forms on the wooden seat, creating what medieval people probably called character building, but what you'd call torture. Here's where it gets really interesting. medieval people were surprisingly innovative about waste management. Some households had elaborate systems of chutes and channels that directed waste away from living areas, and wealthy homes might even have had primitive flush systems using rainwater or diverted streams. But for most people, the privy was a simple hole in the ground with a wooden structure built around it for privacy and weather protection. The social dynamics of medieval bathroom breaks were fascinating. Privacy was a luxury that most people couldn't afford, so bodily functions were much more communal affairs than modern sensibilities would find comfortable. Shared privies were common, and the timing of bathroom breaks often had to be coordinated with other household members to avoid conflicts and maintain some semblance of modesty. You finally make your choice, chamber pot it is, and deal with the immediate crisis while trying to maintain whatever dignity is possible in a medieval morning routine. The relief is immediate, but now you're faced with the reality of what comes next. Getting dressed in clothes that take longer to put on than a modern person spends getting ready for a wedding, and doing it all in a room that's cold enough to preserve meat. The morning devotion and bathroom routine might seem like minor details, but they set the tone for everything that follows. You've survived the night, acknowledged your spiritual obligations, and dealt with basic bodily needs. Now comes the real challenge. Facing a medieval day that will test every limit of human endurance, and doing it all while maintaining the appearance of a respectable woman in a society that has very specific ideas about how women should behave. Remember that chamber pot situation from a few minutes ago? Well, now you're facing an even more pressing medieval reality: breakfast. And by breakfast, I mean the kind of meal that would make a modern nutritionist weep and a food safety inspector call the authorities. You're about to discover why medieval people had such interesting relationships with their digestive systems, and why breaking your fast was less about nutrition and more about survival. You stumbled down the wooden ladder from your sleeping loft, each rung creaking ominously under your weight. The main room of your house is barely warmer than your chamber, and the air is thick with smoke from the hearth that's been smoldering all night. Your eyes water immediately, not from emotion, but from the acrid smoke that medieval people just accepted as part of indoor living. Modern people complain about air pollution, but you're literally breathing a cocktail of wood smoke, cooking fumes, and whatever else has been burning in your fireplace for the past 12 hours. The breakfast spread awaiting you would horrify a modern health enthusiast, but represents the height of medieval morning luxury. There's a loaf of bread that's harder than most modern furniture, a pitcher of ale that's safer to drink than the water, and whatever didn't spoil overnight in your larder. And yes, you read that right, ale for breakfast. Medieval people drank weak beer with their morning meal not because they were alcoholics, but because fermented beverages were often safer than water, which might contain enough bacteria to kill a horse. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll put your morning coffee complaints in perspective. Medieval bread was the foundation of every meal, but it wasn't the fluffy, preservative-laden stuff you're used to. Medieval bread was dense, coarse, and often contained ingredients that modern people would consider inedible. Barley, rye, and oats were common, but in lean times, bread might contain ground acorns, beans, or even sawdust. The wealthy got white bread made from wheat, but for most people, bread was brown, heavy, and required serious jaw muscles to consume. But here's the quirky detail that'll make you appreciate modern food safety. Medieval people often used their bread as plates. These trenchers were thick slices of stale bread that served as both dish and eventual food. You'd pile your meal on top of the bread, and by the end of the meal, the trencher had absorbed all the juices and flavors, making it the medieval equivalent of an edible plate. Waste not, want not, and all that, though the hygiene implications would make a modern person reach for the hand sanitizer. The ale situation deserves special attention because it reveals just how different medieval priorities were from modern ones. Your morning ale isn't the craft beer you might enjoy today. It's a weak, barely fermented beverage that contains just enough alcohol to kill harmful bacteria but not enough to get you drunk. Medieval brewers, often women, were skilled at creating different strengths of ale for different times of day. Morning ale was weak, midday ale was stronger, and evening ale could knock you flat if you weren't careful. Historians still argue whether medieval people were actually healthier than modern people think, given their diet of whole grains, fermented foods, and minimal processed ingredients. But one thing's certain, they had to be creative about food preservation. Your larder is a testament to medieval ingenuity and desperation. There are wheels of cheese aging in cloth wrappings, strips of salted meat hanging from the rafters, and various pickled vegetables floating in clay pots that look like science experiments gone wrong. The cheese alone is worth discussing because medieval cheesemaking was both an art and a survival skill. Without refrigeration, milk had to be processed immediately or it would spoil. Medieval women became experts at creating cheeses that could last for months, developing techniques that modern artisanal cheesemakers are still trying to replicate. Your morning cheese might be hard enough to use as a weapon, but it's packed with nutrients and will keep you alive through the winter. Now, about those pickled vegetables. Medieval people were pickling champions long before it became a trendy food movement. Cabbage, turnips, onions, and whatever else grew in your garden got preserved in salt brine, creating a sour, salty accompaniment to your bread and cheese. These pickled vegetables weren't just food, they were medicine, providing essential vitamins during the long winter months when fresh produce was impossible to find. The morning meal ritual itself was surprisingly social, despite the early hour. Family members gathered around the wooden table, sharing food from common bowls and passing around the ale pitcher. Table manners existed, but they were different from modern etiquette. You ate with your hands, wiped them on bread, and shared drinking vessels without thinking twice about germs, a concept that wouldn't be understood for several more centuries. But here's where breakfast gets really interesting. The timing was crucial. Medieval people ate their main meal in the middle of the day, so breakfast was just enough food to get you through the morning's work. Remember that breakfast of stale bread and questionable ale? Well, now comes the real medieval morning challenge: getting dressed. And by getting dressed, I mean wrestling yourself into a series of garments that would make a modern person question humanity's commitment to survival. You're about to spend the next 30 minutes engaged in what can only be described as a full-contact sport between you and your clothing, where victory is measured by whether you can still breathe when it's over. You start with your chemise, which is basically a long linen shirt that serves as your underwear, nightgown, and first line of defense against the medieval world's complete lack of understanding about personal hygiene. This isn't the soft, comfortable cotton you're imagining. Medieval linen was rough, scratchy, and had the texture of burlap that someone had beaten with a stick. But it's clean, or at least cleaner than everything else you own, and it's the only thing standing between your skin and the wool garments that will spend the day trying to make you itch yourself to death. The chemise goes on easily enough, But now comes the real challenge: your kirtle, which is essentially a fitted dress that requires more engineering than most modern buildings. Medieval women's clothing wasn't just about modesty. It was about demonstrating your family's wealth, your moral character, and your ability to function while wearing what amounts to a fabric straitjacket. The kirtle has to be laced up the back, which means you need help, and in a medieval household, help comes with commentary. Your sister, who's been watching your morning struggle with the kind of amusement that only siblings can provide, steps in to help with the lacing. But here's where medieval clothing gets really interesting. Those laces aren't just decorative. They're structural engineering. Medieval women's dresses were designed to support, shape, and contain the female form in ways that would make a modern corset seem like loungewear. The lacing has to be tight enough to provide support, but not so tight that you pass out during morning chores. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate elastic waistbands. Medieval clothing was sized by adjusting the lacing, not by having different sizes. Your dress was made to fit a range of body shapes and sizes, and the lacing system allowed for adjustments based on weight changes, pregnancy, or how much you'd eaten at the last feast. It was actually quite practical, assuming you didn't mind spending 20 minutes getting dressed every morning. But here's the quirky detail that medieval fashion enthusiasts love. The colors of your clothing weren't just aesthetic choices. They were social statements. Certain colors were restricted to specific social classes, and wearing the wrong color could literally get you in legal trouble. Purple was reserved for royalty, bright red indicated wealth, and if you were caught wearing colors above your station, you could face fines or worse. Your kirtle is probably a nice, safe brown or gray, which says, respectable but not pretentious, in medieval fashion language. Now comes the fun part: your belt, which isn't just an accessory but a medieval tool belt. Medieval women's belts were functional pieces of equipment that held everything from keys to eating knives to small purses. Your belt is leather, probably made from an animal your family raised and slaughtered, and it's worn low on your hips in a style that would make modern fashion designers weep with envy. But it's not about style. It's about having your essential tools within reach while keeping your hands free for work. Historians still argue whether medieval women's clothing was more restrictive than modern formal wear, but one thing's certain: getting dressed was a community activity. Privacy was a luxury that most people couldn't afford, so the daily ritual of dressing involved family members, servants, and anyone else who happened to be around. Your sister is still working on your laces. Your mother is offering unsolicited advice about your posture, and your younger brother is making jokes about how long it takes women to get ready. Apparently, some things never change. The next layer is your surcoat, if you're wealthy enough to own one, or a simple overdress if you're not. This outer garment serves multiple purposes. It protects your kirtle from dirt and damage, provides additional warmth, and displays your family's status to the world. Medieval clothing was designed in layers, not just for warmth but for practicality. You could remove or add layers depending on the weather, the work you were doing, or the social situation you found yourself in. Your sleeves deserve special mention because medieval sleeves were often separate pieces that attached to your dress with pins or ties. This wasn't just a fashion choice, it was practical. Sleeves got dirty, torn, and worn out faster than the rest of your dress, so being able to replace them separately made economic sense. Plus, you could have different sleeves for different occasions, allowing you to change your look without owning multiple complete outfits. The head covering situation is where medieval fashion gets really complex. Every respectable woman covers her hair in public, but the style of covering indicates your age, marital status, and social position. Young unmarried women might wear simple veils or leave their hair partially visible, while married women covered their hair completely. Your head covering isn't just about modesty. It's about communicating your place in society to everyone you meet. But here's where getting dressed becomes a genuine challenge. Medieval clothing was designed for specific activities, and changing clothes during the day wasn't really an option. The outfit you put on in the morning has to work for everything from milking cows to attending church services. Your clothes need to be practical enough for physical labor but respectable enough for social interactions. It's like having to choose one outfit that works for both a construction site and a business meeting. The shoe situation adds another layer of complexity to your morning routine. Medieval shoes were leather, often handmade, and designed more for durability than comfort. They might have wooden soles, leather soles, or no soles at all, depending on your family's economic situation. Your shoes need to protect your feet from rough ground, animal waste, and whatever else you might step in during the day, while still being flexible enough to allow you to work. By the time you're fully dressed, you've spent more time getting ready than most modern people spend on their entire morning routine. But you're not done yet. There are still accessories to consider. Your knife, which every medieval person carried, needs to be secured to your belt. Your purse, which is actually a small bag tied to your belt, needs to be checked for the few coins or small items you might need during the day. The final result is a woman who's dressed for survival in a world that's actively trying to kill her, while still maintaining the appearance of respectability that medieval society demands. You're wearing multiple layers of clothing that restrict your movement, require constant adjustment, and will need to be maintained throughout the day. But you're also protected from the elements, clearly identified as a respectable member of society, and equipped with the tools you need to face whatever the medieval world throws at you. Remember those multiple layers of clothing you just wrestled into? Well, now you get to test their fire resistance because you're about to spend the next hour managing an open flame that could turn your entire house into a medieval barbecue pit. Welcome to Medieval Kitchen Management, where every meal is prepared over a fire that's simultaneously your best friend and your most dangerous enemy, and where cooking means playing a daily game of chance with forces that could kill you faster than you can say. Flame grilled. You approach the hearth with the kind of respect modern people reserve for loaded weapons, because that's essentially what it is. The fire that's been smoldering all night needs to be coaxed back to life, and this process requires a delicate balance of technique, timing, and prayer. You kneel beside the stone hearth, feeling the residual warmth on your face, and begin the ancient ritual of fire management that separates successful medieval women from those who become cautionary tales. The bellows become your new best friend, a leather contraption that looks like it was designed by someone who understood the physics of airflow but had never heard of ergonomics. You pump the bellows with a rhythm that would make a modern fitness instructor proud, watching as the dying embers begin to glow brighter. Each pump sends a shower of sparks dancing up the chimney, and you're acutely aware that one stray spark could set your wooden house ablaze faster than you can blink. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate your modern smoke detector: House fires were so common in medieval times that most towns had specific laws about fire management, and entire neighborhoods could be wiped out by a single cooking accident. Your hearth isn't just a cooking appliance, it's a potential weapon of mass destruction that requires constant vigilance. Medieval women became experts at reading fire behavior, understanding wind patterns, and managing combustible materials with a precision that would impress modern firefighters. But here's the quirky detail that medieval cooking enthusiasts love. The hearth was the social center of the medieval home, despite being a death trap. Families gathered around the fire for warmth, light, and conversation, creating a cozy atmosphere that completely ignored the fact that they were essentially having family time next to a controlled explosion. The hearth was where stories were told, news was shared, and children learned about life, all while everyone pretended not to notice the constant danger lurking just a few feet away. Now comes the real challenge. Cooking over an open flame without modern conveniences like temperature controls, timers, or fire extinguishers. You're working with iron pots that weigh more than most modern appliances, suspended over flames by chains and hooks that require the strength of a medieval warrior to adjust. The heat is intense and uneven, creating hot spots that can burn your food to charcoal while leaving other parts completely raw. Your cooking vessels are works of medieval engineering that would fascinate modern metallurgists. The large iron cauldron hanging over the fire has been in your family for generations, passed down from mother to daughter like a precious heirloom. It's seasoned with decades of use, creating a non-stick surface that modern cookware manufacturers spend millions trying to replicate. But it's also heavy enough to crush a small animal and requires 2 people to move when it's full. The smaller pots and pans scattered around the hearth tell the story of medieval cooking innovation. There are long-handled skillets designed to keep your hands away from the flames, trivets that allow you to cook at different heat levels, and specialized tools for managing coals and adjusting cooking temperatures. Medieval cooks were surprisingly sophisticated in their understanding of heat management, developing techniques that modern chefs are still trying to master. Historians still argue whether medieval cooking was more flavorful than modern cuisine, given the use of fresh herbs, open-fire cooking, and ingredients that hadn't been processed into oblivion, but one thing's certain, it was infinitely more dangerous. You're constantly moving between extreme heat and cold, managing heavy equipment, while wearing long skirts that could catch fire, and working with tools that could cause serious injury if mishandled. The smoke situation deserves special attention because medieval kitchens were basically controlled smoking chambers. Your eyes are streaming, your throat is burning, and you're developing the kind of persistent cough that medieval people just accepted as part of indoor living. The chimney, when it works properly, draws most of the smoke up and out, but medieval chimneys were notoriously unreliable, and wind conditions could send smoke billowing back into your kitchen without warning. But here's where medieval cooking gets really interesting: the fuel management. You're not just cooking, you're managing a complex energy system that requires different types of wood for different cooking tasks. Hardwoods like oak burn hot and long, perfect for roasting meat or cooking stews that need hours of simmering. Softwoods like pine burn quickly and hot, ideal for boiling water or quick cooking tasks. You need to understand the burning characteristics of different woods, plan your fuel consumption for the entire day, and maintain a supply of dry kindling that's protected from moisture. The food preparation happening around the fire would make a modern food safety inspector reach for the smelling salts. You're working with ingredients that have been stored without refrigeration, using cutting boards that have never seen soap, and preparing meals in an environment where smoke, ash, and various airborne particles are constantly settling on everything. But medieval people had developed preservation and preparation techniques that actually worked quite well, creating flavorful, nutritious meals despite conditions that would horrify modern sensibilities. Your morning cooking routine involves preparing the day's main meal, which will be served in the middle of the day when the family gathers for their primary feast. This means you're cooking for hours, managing multiple dishes simultaneously, and maintaining the fire at different temperatures for different cooking tasks. You're essentially running a medieval restaurant with equipment that would make a modern chef weep and safety standards that would shut down any modern establishment. The multitasking required for medieval cooking would impress modern efficiency experts. You're stirring a pot with one hand while adjusting the fire with the other, keeping an eye on bread baking in the side oven while monitoring the roast turning on the spit. Every task requires physical strength, precise timing, and constant attention, because a moment's inattention could result in burned food, a kitchen fire, or serious injury. The social dynamics of kitchen work revealed the complex relationships within medieval households. Other family members drift in and out of the kitchen, offering help, commentary, or just seeking warmth from the fire. Children learn cooking skills by watching and gradually taking on simple tasks, while older family members share wisdom about fire management, ingredient preparation, and the subtle arts of medieval cuisine. By the time you've got the morning cooking routine under control, you're sweating from the heat, your clothes smell like smoke, and your hands are stained with soot and food preparation. But you've successfully managed one of the most dangerous daily activities in medieval life, creating meals that will sustain your family while avoiding the kind of catastrophic accidents that could destroy everything you own. Remember that kitchen fire you just managed to not burn your house down with? Well, now you get to venture into the medieval equivalent of a zombie apocalypse, Market Day. You're about to discover why medieval shopping was less retail therapy, and more survival horror, where pickpockets are the least of your worries and the smell alone could knock a modern person unconscious. Welcome to the medieval marketplace, where every transaction is a negotiation, every crowd is a potential riot, and every vendor is trying to sell you something that might actually kill you. You step out of your house into the narrow street, and immediately your senses are assaulted by a cocktail of medieval urban living that would make a modern city seem like a pristine wilderness. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with a mixture of mud, animal waste, and substances you've learned not to investigate too closely. Medieval streets weren't just transportation routes. They were open sewers, garbage dumps, and livestock highways all rolled into one delightful package. The crowd pressing around you represents every level of medieval society, from wealthy merchants in their fine wool cloaks to beggars displaying their various ailments with the enthusiasm of modern street performers. But here's the thing about medieval crowds: they're not just inconvenient, they're genuinely dangerous. Pickpockets work in organized gangs, using the press of bodies to mask their activities, and a moment's inattention could leave you without the coins you need to feed your family. Your first stop is the bread stall, where the baker's wife is hawking loaves that look suspiciously different from what you saw her making yesterday. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern food regulations. Medieval bakers were notorious for adulterating their bread with cheaper ingredients, and getting caught could result in public humiliation, fines, or worse. The bread you're examining might contain sawdust, chalk, or ground beans, and determining quality requires skills that modern consumers have completely lost. But here's the quirky detail that medieval market enthusiasts love: haggling wasn't just expected, it was an art form. Every price was negotiable, every transaction was a performance, and your ability to bargain effectively could mean the difference between eating well and going hungry. The baker's wife quotes you a price that's obviously inflated. You counter with an offer that's insultingly low, and the dance begins. This isn't just commerce. It's medieval theater with real-world consequences. The meat stall presents its own set of challenges that would horrify modern health inspectors. Chunks of beef, pork, and mutton hang from hooks, covered with flies and developing a patina that you hope is just natural aging. There's no refrigeration, no sell-by dates, and no health department inspections. Your ability to judge meat quality by sight, smell, and touch could literally be a matter of life and death. Medieval people developed sophisticated techniques for evaluating meat freshness, understanding the subtle signs that indicated whether flesh was safe to eat or destined to become a one-way ticket to medieval food poisoning. The butcher himself is a character straight out of a medieval horror story. Blood-stained apron, massive cleaver, and the kind of cheerful demeanor that suggests he genuinely enjoys his work. He's chopping through bones with the enthusiasm of someone who's found his calling, sending bone fragments and meat scraps flying in all directions. The wooden chopping block he's using has absorbed decades of blood and grease, creating a surface that would make a modern food safety inspector faint on the spot. Historians still argue whether medieval people had stronger immune systems due to constant exposure to bacteria and pathogens. But one thing's certain: they had to be incredibly careful about food selection. You're examining a piece of pork with the intensity of a modern forensic investigator, checking for signs of disease, spoilage, or the kind of creative butchering that might indicate the animal died of something other than intentional slaughter. The vegetable vendors present a different set of challenges. Medieval vegetables were smaller, tougher, and often more flavorful than modern varieties, but they were also more likely to be contaminated with soil-borne diseases or parasites. The carrots look like orange twigs, the cabbages are the size of modern Brussels sprouts, and everything is covered with a layer of dirt that suggests it was harvested this morning and transported by methods that didn't prioritize cleanliness. But here's where medieval markets get really interesting: the social dynamics. The marketplace isn't just about commerce. It's the medieval equivalent of social media, where news travels, gossip spreads, and reputations are made or destroyed. You're not just buying food, you're participating in a complex social network that determines your family's standing in the community. The vendors you choose to patronize, the prices you're willing to pay, and the way you conduct yourself all send signals about your family's wealth, status, and social connections. The crowd around you is a fascinating cross-section of medieval society, each person identifiable by their clothing, their accent, and their behavior. Wealthy merchants move through the crowd with an air of authority, their fine clothes and confident demeanor clearing a path through the masses. Craftsmen and artisans examine goods with the critical eye of people who understand quality and value. Servants and laborers cluster around the cheaper stalls, counting coins carefully and making every purchase a calculated decision. The noise level in the medieval marketplace would make a modern rock concert seem quiet by comparison. Vendors are shouting their wares in voices that carry over the crowd, customers are haggling at volumes that suggest they're trying to be heard in the next county, and animals are adding their own commentary to the chaos. Chickens squawk from their cages, pigs grunt from their pens, and dogs bark as they compete for scraps that fall from the various food stalls. Your purse, which is actually a small leather bag tied to your belt, contains the family's carefully hoarded coins, and every expenditure requires serious consideration. Medieval money was actual silver and gold, not the paper promises modern people are used to, and losing your coins meant genuine hardship. You're constantly aware of the weight of your purse, the security of its ties, and the positioning of your body to protect it from the pickpockets who work the crowd with professional efficiency. The smells of the medieval marketplace create a sensory experience that would overwhelm modern senses. There's the yeasty aroma of fresh bread mixing with the metallic scent of blood from the butcher stalls, the earthy smell of vegetables and herbs competing with the less pleasant odors of unwashed bodies and animal waste. Medieval people had much more sensitive noses than modern people, able to detect subtle differences in food quality and safety through smell alone. But here's the really challenging part. You're not just shopping for today's meals. You're making strategic decisions about food storage, preservation, and family nutrition that will affect your household for weeks to come. Every purchase requires consideration of how the food will be stored, how long it will last, and how it fits into your family's overall dietary needs. You're essentially running a medieval logistics operation while navigating a crowd that would challenge a modern crowd control expert. The transaction process itself is a complex dance of evaluation, negotiation, and payment that requires skills modern consumers have completely lost. You're examining goods with the intensity of a professional buyer, negotiating prices with the skill of a diplomat, and making payment with coins that represent real value and genuine sacrifice. Remember that chaotic marketplace where you just survived medieval shopping without getting pickpocketed or poisoned? Well, now you're back home facing the medieval equivalent of a formal dinner party. Except this party could literally kill you if you mess up the social hierarchy. Welcome to the midday meal, where knowing who sits where, who eats what, and who gets served first isn't just etiquette. It's survival in a world where insulting the wrong person could result in anything from social exile to actual violence. You enter your main hall carrying your market purchases, and immediately the atmosphere shifts from morning chaos to structured formality. The midday meal isn't just about nutrition, it's about displaying your family's status, reinforcing social bonds, and navigating the complex web of medieval relationships that determine everything from business partnerships to marriage prospects. Your stomach might be growling, but your brain needs to be calculating social dynamics with the precision of a medieval chess master. The seating arrangement alone requires more strategic thinking than most modern people apply to their entire careers. Your family's table isn't just furniture, it's a carefully orchestrated display of power, respect, and social understanding. The head of the household sits at the high table, elevated both literally and figuratively above everyone else. Family members, guests, and servants are arranged in a precise hierarchy that communicates their relative importance to anyone who understands medieval social codes. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern casual dining. Medieval meals were theatrical performances where every gesture, every serving order, and every conversation topic was carefully choreographed to maintain social harmony. Getting the protocol wrong wasn't just embarrassing. It could damage relationships that your family depended on for economic survival, political protection and social standing. But here's the quirky detail that medieval dining enthusiasts love: the concept of trencher companions. You're not just eating your own meal, you're sharing dishes, cups, and even eating utensils with specific people according to complex social rules. Your trencher companion might be your spouse, honored guest, or someone whose social status requires careful management. The intimacy of sharing food and drink created bonds that were both practical and symbolic, turning every meal into a ritual of trust and mutual obligation. The food presentation would make a modern restaurant critic reach for their notebook, but not for the reasons you might expect. Medieval meals were designed to impress through abundance, variety, and elaborate preparation rather than aesthetic presentation. Your table is groaning under the weight of multiple courses, each designed to demonstrate your family's wealth and the cook's skill. There are roasted meats that required hours of preparation, elaborate pies filled with combinations that would surprise modern palates, and side dishes that showcase seasonal ingredients and preservation techniques. Your role as a medieval woman during this meal is a complex balancing act that would challenge a modern diplomat. You're responsible for ensuring that guests are properly served, that family members receive appropriate portions, and that the meal proceeds smoothly without social disasters. You're constantly monitoring the conversation, the serving order, and the subtle social cues that indicate whether relationships are being strengthened or damaged by the dining experience. The grace before the meal is a serious affair that sets the tone for everything that follows. This isn't a quick, "Bless this food," mumbled over a modern dinner. It's a formal prayer that acknowledges God's providence, requests divine blessing on the household, and reinforces the religious framework that governs medieval life. Everyone stands, heads bowed, while the head of household or honored guest delivers a prayer that can last several minutes and covers everything from gratitude for the harvest to requests for protection from enemies. Historians still argue whether medieval people enjoyed their food more than modern people, given the absence of processed ingredients and the emphasis on seasonal, local produce. But one thing's certain: they took their meals much more seriously. Every bite was earned through hard work. Every ingredient represented careful planning and resource management, and every meal was an opportunity to strengthen or weaken the social bonds that determined your family's survival. The serving ritual itself is a carefully choreographed dance that would make a modern restaurant service seem chaotic by comparison. Servants, family members, and guests all have specific roles in the serving process, and the order of service communicates important information about status, respect, and social relationships. You're not just ladling food onto plates, you're participating in a complex social ritual that reinforces the hierarchical structure of medieval society. The conversation during the meal follows rules that would challenge a modern etiquette expert. Topics are chosen carefully to avoid controversy, maintain social harmony, and demonstrate the participants' education and social awareness. You're expected to contribute to the conversation while monitoring the needs of other diners, managing the serving process, and ensuring that the meal proceeds without social disasters. But here's where medieval dining gets really challenging: the table manners. Medieval people had elaborate rules about how to eat, what to touch, and how to behave during meals, but these rules were completely different from modern etiquette. You eat with your hands, share drinking vessels, and wipe your fingers on bread rather than napkins. The goal isn't hygiene as modern people understand it. It's demonstrating your understanding of proper social behavior, and your respect for your dining companions. The food itself tells the story of medieval cooking innovation and resource management. The bread serves as both food and plate. The meat has been prepared using techniques that maximize flavor and nutrition, and the vegetables showcase the cook's ability to transform simple ingredients into complex, satisfying dishes. Every item on the table represents hours of preparation, careful resource management, and skilled cooking techniques that modern people have largely forgotten. Your wine or ale consumption during the meal requires careful management because medieval beverages were much stronger than modern people expect, and maintaining your composure while navigating complex social dynamics is essential. The drinks aren't just refreshment, they're part of the social ritual, with specific rules about who drinks when, how much is appropriate, and the proper way to share drinking vessels. The meal's pacing is completely different from modern dining experiences. Medieval people ate slowly, savoring each course and using the meal as an opportunity for extended social interaction. The dining experience might last for hours, with multiple courses, entertainment between dishes, and conversations that range from local gossip to serious business discussions. But here's the really stressful part. You're constantly evaluating the success of the meal from multiple perspectives. Are the guests satisfied with the food quality and quantity? Are the social dynamics proceeding smoothly? Is your family's reputation being enhanced or damaged by the dining experience? Are there any subtle insults or social missteps that need to be addressed before they escalate into serious problems? The cleanup process that follows the meal is almost as complex as the serving ritual. Dishes need to be cleared in a specific order, leftover food needs to be distributed according to social rules, and the dining area needs to be restored to its normal configuration. You're not just cleaning up after a meal, you're managing the conclusion of a social performance that has implications for your family's standing in the community. The afternoon stretches ahead with its own challenges, but for now, you've successfully navigated one of the most complex social rituals in medieval life. The midday meal is over, relationships have been maintained or strengthened, and your family's reputation remains intact. But the day is far from over, and the next challenge is already waiting. Remember that elaborate midday meal where you successfully navigated medieval social politics without starting a family feud? Well, now comes the part of your day that would make a modern sweatshop seem like a luxury spa: textile work. You're about to spend the next several hours engaged in what medieval people called women's work, but what modern people would recognize as a form of repetitive stress torture that makes your fingers bleed while slowly destroying your eyesight. Welcome to the medieval textile industry, where every thread in your household must be created by hand, and where fast fashion means you might finish a single garment before winter kills you. You settle into your designated spot near the window, where the afternoon light provides the best illumination for the intricate work ahead. Your spinning wheel, if your family is wealthy enough to own one, sits ready like a medieval torture device designed by someone who understood the mechanics of repetitive motion but had never heard of ergonomics. If you're not wealthy enough for a spinning wheel, you're working with a drop spindle, a simple tool that's been making women's lives miserable since the dawn of civilization. The raw wool sitting in your basket tells the story of medieval textile production from sheep to clothing. This isn't the clean, processed fiber that modern crafters purchase from hobby stores. This is wool that still contains bits of vegetation, sheep dung, and various insects that considered your sheep their personal transportation system. Before you can even begin spinning, you need to clean, card, and prepare the wool through a process that would make a modern person appreciate synthetic fabrics with religious fervor. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate your local clothing store. Medieval women were expected to produce all the textiles for their households, from underwear to bed linens to formal clothing. This wasn't a hobby or a creative outlet. It was an essential survival skill that determined whether your family would have adequate clothing to survive the winter. A woman who couldn't spin, weave, and sew was essentially unemployable in medieval society. But here's the quirky detail that textile historians love. Medieval spinning was so important that unmarried women were called spinsters, and the quality of a woman's spinning was considered an indicator of her character, work ethic, and suitability as a wife. Your spinning wheel wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of feminine virtue and domestic competence. A woman with a smooth, even thread was considered more marriageable than one whose spinning was lumpy and irregular. The actual process of spinning would challenge a modern person's patience and pain tolerance. You're sitting in an awkward position, maintaining constant tension on the fiber while operating the wheel with a foot pedal that requires precise timing and pressure. Your hands are moving in complex, coordinated motions that must be maintained for hours without significant breaks. The repetitive motion creates a rhythm that's almost meditative, but it also creates physical stress that accumulates over time into genuine injury. Your fingers are already showing the signs of a lifetime of textile work: calluses from handling rough fibers, small cuts from broken threads, and the kind of joint stiffness that modern people associate with arthritis. Medieval women developed textile-related injuries that would horrify modern occupational health specialists. But they had no choice but to continue working through pain that would send a modern person to physical therapy. The thread you're creating isn't just string, it's the foundation of your family's economic survival. Every yard of thread represents hours of labor that could be converted into clothing, traded for other goods, or sold for coins that could purchase necessities your family couldn't produce. Medieval women understood the economic value of their textile work in ways that modern people, accustomed to cheap manufactured clothing, can barely comprehend. Historians still argue whether medieval textile work was more satisfying than modern manufacturing jobs, given the connection between worker and finished product. But one thing's certain, it was infinitely more physically demanding. You're creating something from raw materials through skilled labor, but you're also destroying your body through repetitive stress that accumulates over decades of daily work. The social dynamics of textile work reveal the complex relationships within medieval households. Other women in your family are engaged in similar work, creating an atmosphere of shared labor and mutual support. Conversations flow around the spinning wheels and looms, covering everything from local gossip to serious family business. This isn't just work, it's social time, education, and community building all rolled into one exhausting package. But here's where medieval textile work gets really interesting: the quality standards. Medieval people were incredibly particular about thread quality, fabric consistency, and finished garment construction. Your work is constantly being evaluated by other women who understand the subtle differences between excellent and merely adequate textile work. A poorly spun thread or uneven weave could damage your reputation and affect your family's social standing. The tools you're using represent generations of technological development and family investment. Your spinning wheel might have been passed down from your grandmother, carefully maintained and gradually improved over decades of use. The wooden components are worn smooth by countless hands, and every part has been adjusted and readjusted to achieve optimal performance. This isn't just equipment, it's a family heirloom that represents accumulated knowledge and economic investment. The fiber preparation process alone would exhaust a modern person. Before you can spin, you need to card the wool using brushes with metal teeth that comb the fibers into parallel alignment. This process removes debris, creates uniform fiber length, and prepares the wool for spinning. Your hands are constantly moving through motions that require strength, dexterity, and endurance, while your eyes strain to identify and remove impurities that could create weak spots in the finished thread. The rhythm of spinning creates a hypnotic pattern that medieval women used to manage the mental challenges of repetitive work. You're not just mechanically creating thread, you're thinking about family needs, planning future projects, and maintaining the kind of mental focus that prevents costly mistakes. A moment's inattention could result in broken thread, uneven spinning, or damaged equipment that represents significant economic loss. Your afternoon textile session is producing thread that will eventually become clothing for your family, but the process from fiber to finished garment involves multiple steps that could take months to complete. The thread you're spinning today might not become a finished garment until next season, requiring planning and foresight that modern people, accustomed to instant gratification, find difficult to comprehend. The physical toll of textile work is cumulative and irreversible. Your posture is gradually deteriorating from hours spent hunched over your work. Your eyesight is slowly failing from straining to see fine details in inadequate light, and your hands are developing the kind of repetitive stress injuries that will affect you for the rest of your life. But stopping isn't an option because your family's survival depends on the textiles you produce. The afternoon light is beginning to fade, and you're racing against darkness to complete as much work as possible. Medieval people understood the value of daylight in ways that modern people, with their electric lighting, can't appreciate. Every hour of good light represents productive time that can't be recovered once it's lost. Remember that textile torture session where you slowly destroyed your eyesight and finger joints for the sake of family survival? Well, now comes the part of medieval life that would make a modern helicopter parent have a complete nervous breakdown. Managing children in a world where death lurks around every corner like a particularly persistent salesman. You're about to discover why medieval childhood was less innocent playtime and more daily survival training, where a moment's inattention could result in your offspring becoming a cautionary tale that other parents whisper about in hushed, terrified tones. Your children are scattered around the house and yard, engaged in activities that would send a modern safety inspector into cardiac arrest. Little Margaret, who's barely old enough to walk steadily, is playing near the open hearth where the cooking fire could turn her into a medieval tragedy faster than you can blink. Young Thomas is climbing on the wooden fence that separates your yard from the neighbor's livestock, apparently unaware that medieval construction standards were more suggestion than safety requirement. And Baby is crawling around the floor, systematically putting everything she finds into her mouth, including substances that would horrify a modern toxicologist. The open well in your courtyard represents the kind of everyday danger that medieval parents just had to live with. There's no safety fence, no protective covering, just a deep hole filled with water that could swallow a small child without a trace. You've taught your children to stay away from the well, but medieval children were just as curious and disobedient as modern ones, and the consequences of childhood mistakes were infinitely more severe. Every time you lose sight of your children for more than a few seconds, your heart rate spikes with the kind of anxiety that modern parents reserve for their worst nightmares. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern child safety laws. Medieval childhood mortality rates were so high that parents often didn't name their children until they were several years old, assuming they would survive that long. Your emotional investment in your children is carefully calibrated to protect your own sanity. Because becoming too attached to a child who might not survive to adulthood was a recipe for psychological devastation that medieval people couldn't afford. But here's the quirky detail that medieval childhood historians love: children were considered miniature adults, and were expected to contribute to household labor from an incredibly young age. Little Margaret, despite being barely past toddlerhood, already has specific chores that are essential to family survival. She's responsible for feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, and helping with simple food preparation tasks. This isn't child labor as modern people understand it. It's survival training that teaches children the skills they'll need to stay alive in a world that's actively trying to kill them. The diseases that threaten your children would make a modern pediatrician reach for the strongest available medications. Medieval children faced threats from smallpox, plague, dysentery, and a dozen other ailments that could kill quickly and without warning. Your knowledge of childhood illness is a mixture of practical experience, folk wisdom, and desperate hope, because medieval medicine's understanding of pediatric care was roughly equivalent to modern people's understanding of quantum physics. Your children's clothing tells the story of medieval childhood practicality. They're dressed in miniature versions of adult clothing, designed for durability rather than comfort or style. Little Thomas is wearing a tunic that's been handed down from his older brother, patched and repatched until it's more repair than original fabric. The clothing is designed to withstand the kind of rough play and hard work that medieval childhood required, but it's also restrictive and uncomfortable in ways that would make modern children rebel immediately. The educational aspects of medieval childhood would surprise modern parents who are accustomed to formal schooling. Your children are learning through observation, imitation, and hands-on experience rather than classroom instruction. Margaret is learning cooking skills by watching you work. Thomas is developing agricultural knowledge by helping with farm chores. And even Baby Anne is absorbing the rhythms and routines of medieval life through constant exposure to adult activities. Historians still argue whether medieval children were happier than modern children, given their freedom from academic pressure and their integration into meaningful adult work. But one thing's certain: they face dangers that would terrify modern parents. Your children play games that involve real tools, climb structures that would violate every modern safety code, and explore environments that contain genuine hazards at every turn. The supervision challenges you face would overwhelm a modern parent. You're trying to monitor multiple children while managing your own demanding work schedule, and the consequences of inadequate supervision could be fatal. Medieval parents developed a kind of peripheral awareness that allowed them to track their children's activities while engaged in other tasks. But this constant vigilance created a level of stress that modern parents can barely imagine. Your children's play activities reflect the harsh realities of medieval life. They play with miniature weapons, practice adult work skills, and engage in games that prepare them for the challenges they'll face as adults. Little Thomas has a wooden sword that he uses to practice combat techniques, not because medieval people were particularly violent, but because the ability to defend oneself was an essential survival skill in a world where violence was a constant threat. The social dynamics of medieval childhood revealed the complex relationships within extended families and communities. Your children interact with cousins, neighbors, and family servants in ways that create a support network for child supervision and education. This isn't just convenience. It's a survival strategy that ensures children receive attention and guidance from multiple adults who understand the dangers they face. But here's where medieval child-rearing gets really challenging: the balance between protection and preparation. You need to keep your children safe from immediate dangers while teaching them the skills they'll need to survive as adults in a hostile world. Overprotection could leave them unprepared for adult responsibilities, but inadequate protection could result in injury or death that ends their childhood permanently. The emotional challenges of medieval parenting would challenge modern psychological understanding. You love your children deeply, but you also need to maintain emotional distance that protects you from the devastating grief that could result from childhood death. This emotional balancing act requires strength and resilience that modern parents, protected by medical advances and safety regulations, rarely need to develop. Your children's diet and nutrition reflect the practical realities of medieval food production and preservation. They eat what the family eats, with no special consideration for childhood nutritional needs or preferences. Medieval children developed strong constitutions through exposure to a diet that would challenge modern digestive systems, but they also faced nutritional deficiencies that could affect their development and health. The sleeping arrangements for your children would surprise modern parents who are accustomed to private bedrooms and individual beds. Medieval children often shared beds with siblings, parents, or other family members, creating intimate family bonds but also exposing them to diseases and disturbances that could affect their sleep and health. The afternoon is wearing on, and you're constantly calculating the balance between allowing your children the freedom they need to develop independence and maintaining the supervision necessary to keep them alive. Every decision involves risk assessment that would challenge a modern safety expert, and the consequences of poor judgment could be irreversible. Your children are growing up in a world that will demand strength, resilience, and practical skills that modern education systems don't even attempt to teach. They're learning to navigate dangers, solve problems, and contribute to family survival in ways that will prepare them for adult responsibilities that modern people can barely comprehend. Remember those children you've been trying to keep alive while they explore every possible way to accidentally kill themselves? Well, now comes the medieval equivalent of being a pharmacist, doctor, and which all rolled into one terrifying package: herbal medicine. You're about to spend the next hour brewing mysterious concoctions that could either cure your family's ailments or accidentally poison everyone you love, and the only way to tell the difference is through trial and error that could have fatal consequences. Welcome to medieval healthcare, where your garden is your pharmacy and your kitchen is your operating room. You step into your herb garden, which looks like something between a modern organic farm and a medieval witch's laboratory. Every plant growing here serves a specific medicinal purpose. But here's the catch: many of these same plants could kill you if you get the dosage wrong, harvest them at the wrong time, or confuse one species with another. Your knowledge of herbal medicine is a mixture of family tradition, neighborhood gossip, and desperate experimentation, because medieval medical schools didn't exactly offer correspondence courses for housewives. The foxglove growing near your kitchen door is a perfect example of medieval medical complexity. This beautiful purple flower contains compounds that can regulate heart rhythm and treat various ailments. But it's also toxic enough to kill a horse if you're not careful with the preparation. Medieval women learned to walk the fine line between medicine and poison through years of careful observation, gradual experimentation, and the kind of practical knowledge that modern pharmaceutical companies spend millions trying to replicate. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate your local pharmacy. Medieval people relied entirely on plant-based medicine for treating everything from headaches to plague, and the women who prepared these remedies were essentially practicing chemistry without understanding the underlying science. Your herb garden represents a complex pharmaceutical laboratory where every plant has been selected, cultivated, and maintained based on generations of accumulated medical knowledge. But here's the quirky detail that medieval medicine enthusiasts love. Many of the herbal remedies that medieval women used actually worked, and modern pharmaceutical companies are still studying medieval recipes to develop new medications. Your grandmother's recipe for willow bark tea contains the same active compounds found in modern aspirin, and the chamomile you're growing for digestive problems has been scientifically proven to have genuine therapeutic effects. You're currently preparing a remedy for your husband's persistent cough, which has been getting worse over the past week. The combination of herbs you're using, coltsfoot, horehound, and honey, represents a sophisticated understanding of respiratory medicine that would impress a modern herbalist. But you're also adding ingredients that modern medicine would consider questionable at best, including ground unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, and a pinch of blessed salt that the local priest charged you extra for. The preparation process itself would fascinate a modern chemist. You're grinding herbs with a mortar and pestle, extracting essences through careful heating and cooling, and combining ingredients in proportions that have been passed down through generations of women who understood the practical effects even if they couldn't explain the underlying chemistry. Your kitchen has become a medieval laboratory where you're conducting experiments that could save lives or end them. The tools you're using for herbal preparation tell the story of medieval medical innovation. Your mortar and pestle are made from stone that's been carefully selected for its hardness and non-reactive properties. The various pots and pans you use for brewing remedies are dedicated specifically to medical preparation, never used for cooking food because medieval people understood that contamination could affect the potency of their medicines. Historians still argue whether medieval herbal medicine was more effective than modern people assume, given the sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry that medieval women developed through practical experience. But one thing's certain, it was infinitely more dangerous. You're working with substances that could cause serious harm if misused, and your knowledge of proper dosages comes from observation and tradition rather than scientific testing. The social dynamics of medieval medicine reveal the complex relationships between women, healing, and community survival. Your neighbors regularly come to you for medical advice, herbal remedies, and treatment for various ailments. This isn't just neighborly assistance. It's a crucial community service that could mean the difference between life and death for families who can't afford professional medical care. But here's where medieval medicine gets really interesting: the supernatural elements. Your herbal preparations aren't just based on the physical properties of plants. They're also influenced by astrological timing, religious blessings, and various magical practices that medieval people considered essential to effective healing. You're not just brewing medicine, you're conducting rituals that combine practical chemistry with spiritual intervention. The prayers you mutter while preparing remedies aren't just religious observance. They're an integral part of the healing process, as medieval people understood it. You're asking for divine blessing on your work, protection from harmful effects, and guidance in creating remedies that will help rather than harm. Medieval medicine was as much about spiritual intervention as it was about physical treatment. Your knowledge of plant identification would challenge a modern botanist. You can distinguish between dozens of similar-looking plants based on subtle differences in leaf shape, flower color, and growth patterns. A mistake in plant identification could result in accidental poisoning, so your botanical knowledge represents years of careful study and practical experience that could literally be a matter of life and death. The timing of herb collection follows rules that combine practical knowledge with medieval superstition. Certain plants are more potent when harvested at specific times of day, during particular phases of the moon, or under specific weather conditions. Your herbal calendar is a complex document that tracks optimal harvesting times for dozens of different plants, ensuring that your remedies have maximum potency and effectiveness. The storage and preservation of herbal medicines require techniques that would impress a modern pharmacist. You're drying herbs in specific ways to preserve their active compounds, storing them in containers that protect them from light and moisture, and organizing your medical supplies with the precision of a professional pharmacy. Your herb storage area is a carefully maintained repository of medical knowledge that represents your family's insurance against illness and injury. But here's the really challenging part. You're practicing medicine without any formal training, scientific understanding, or legal protection. If your remedies work, you're considered a valuable community resource. If they fail, you could be blamed for the patient's death and face serious social or legal consequences. Medieval women who practiced herbal medicine walked a fine line between being respected healers and being accused of witchcraft. The diagnostic skills you've developed through years of treating family and neighbors would surprise modern medical professionals. You can identify illnesses based on subtle symptoms, understand the progression of various diseases, and predict treatment outcomes with accuracy that comes from extensive practical experience. Your medical knowledge is entirely empirical, based on observation and results rather than theoretical understanding. The afternoon light is perfect for harvesting the herbs you need for tonight's remedy preparation. You're moving through your garden with the confidence of someone who understands the medical properties of every plant, but also with the caution of someone who knows that a single mistake could have fatal consequences. Your herbal medicine practice represents both the sophistication and the dangers of medieval healthcare, where knowledge and superstition combined to create a medical system that was both effective and terrifying. Remember those herbal concoctions you just brewed that could either cure your husband's cough or accidentally turn him into a cautionary tale about medieval medicine? Well, now comes the part of your day that would make a modern farmer appreciate automation with religious devotion, evening chores, and livestock management. You're about to discover why medieval people went to bed exhausted every single night, as you race against the dying daylight to complete tasks that could mean the difference between your family eating tomorrow or slowly starving through the winter. The sun is beginning its descent toward the horizon, and you can feel the familiar panic that accompanies every medieval evening, the race against darkness. Without electric lighting, your productive day ends when the sun disappears, and there's still a mountain of work that needs to be completed before you can even think about rest. Your livestock don't care about your exhaustion, your schedule, or your desperate need for a moment's peace. They need to be fed, watered, milked, and secured before nightfall, or you'll wake up to discover that wolves, thieves, or simple negligence has cost your family their primary source of protein and income. You grab the wooden milk bucket, which has been worn smooth by generations of women who face this same evening routine, and head toward the cowshed with the kind of determined resignation that medieval people perfected through daily practice. Your cow, Bessie, is a temperamental beast who seems to take personal offense at being milked and has developed a repertoire of ways to make your life miserable. She kicks, she moves at the worst possible moments, and she has an uncanny ability to step directly into the milk bucket just as you're finishing the tedious process. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern dairy farming. Medieval cows produced significantly less milk than modern breeds, and the milking process was a daily gamble that could result in injury, lost milk, or both. Your family's survival depends on Bessie's cooperation and continued health, but medieval veterinary care consisted mainly of prayer, herbal remedies, and a kind of folk wisdom that was passed down through generations of people who couldn't afford to lose their livestock. But here's the quirky detail that medieval agriculture enthusiasts love. Cows were so valuable in medieval society that they were often considered more important than some family members. A good milk cow represented wealth, security, and daily nutrition that could keep a family alive through hard times. Bessie isn't just livestock. She's a four-legged insurance policy that provides milk, cheese, butter, and eventually meat, making her one of your family's most valuable possessions. The milking process itself would challenge a modern person's patience and physical endurance. You're squatting beside a large, unpredictable animal, maintaining the precise hand movements necessary to extract milk while staying alert for kicks, sudden movements, or the various ways that Bessie can express her displeasure with the entire situation. Your hands are already aching from the day's textile work, but milking requires strength, dexterity, and persistence that can't be postponed until tomorrow. The milk you're collecting represents liquid gold in medieval terms. Every drop is precious because it can be consumed fresh, churned into butter, or processed into cheese that will provide nutrition through the winter months. Medieval people wasted nothing, and spilled milk wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a genuine economic loss that could affect your family's nutrition and financial stability. Your chickens present their own set of evening challenges that would amuse modern poultry farmers. Medieval chickens were smaller, more aggressive, and significantly more intelligent than modern breeds, having retained the survival instincts that domestic fowl have largely lost. They're scattered around the yard, pecking at insects, seeds, and whatever else catches their attention, but they need to be rounded up and secured in their coop before darkness brings predators that view your chickens as a convenient fast food delivery service. The chicken herding process would make a modern person appreciate the phrase, like herding cats. Your chickens have developed individual personalities and preferences that make gathering them a complex negotiation rather than a simple task. Some respond to food incentives, others require gentle coaxing, and a few seem to take perverse pleasure in making you chase them around the yard while daylight disappears and your patience evaporates. Historians still argue whether medieval people had closer relationships with their animals than modern people, given the daily interaction and mutual dependence. But one thing's certain: they understood animal behavior in ways that modern people have largely forgotten. You can predict your chicken's moods, anticipate their reactions, and manage their behavior through techniques that combine practical knowledge with years of daily experience. The egg collection process reveals the complex economics of medieval poultry management. Each egg represents potential protein, future chickens, or trade goods that could be exchanged for other necessities. You're not just gathering eggs. You're conducting a daily inventory of your family's protein reserves and making decisions about consumption, preservation, and breeding that will affect your nutrition for months to come. But here's where evening livestock management gets really stressful: the predator situation. Medieval farms existed in a world where wolves, foxes, weasels, and various other carnivores viewed your livestock as a convenient buffet that was thoughtfully provided for their dining pleasure. Your evening routine isn't just about animal care, it's about security measures that could prevent devastating losses that would threaten your family's survival. The pig situation deserves special mention because medieval pigs were essentially small, intelligent, and surprisingly dangerous wild animals that happened to live in your yard. Your family pig is a valuable source of meat, but it's also a creature that could seriously injure you if mishandled. Medieval pigs retain many of the characteristics of their wild ancestors, including intelligence, aggression, and the kind of survival instincts that made them formidable opponents when they decided to be uncooperative. The feed preparation for your animals requires careful calculation and resource management that would challenge a modern agricultural economist. You're balancing the nutritional needs of different animals against the available feed supplies, seasonal variations, and the economic reality that feeding your livestock too well could leave your family without adequate nutrition. Medieval animal husbandry was a complex optimization problem that required understanding of nutrition, economics, and long-term planning. Your barn and animal shelters represent significant investments in time, materials, and labor that must be maintained constantly to protect your valuable livestock. Medieval buildings were constructed without modern materials or techniques, requiring ongoing repairs and maintenance that competed with other demands on your time and resources. A leaking roof or damaged wall could result in sick animals, lost feed, or security vulnerabilities that predators could exploit. The water management for your animals involves hauling buckets from the well, monitoring consumption, and ensuring that water sources remain clean and accessible. Medieval people understood the importance of clean water for animal health, but providing it required daily labor and constant vigilance that modern automated systems have eliminated. The evening light is fading rapidly, and you're racing to complete the essential tasks that can't be postponed until tomorrow. Your animals are finally secured, fed, and watered, but the physical exhaustion from the day's work is beginning to catch up with you. Medieval people didn't have the luxury of rest until all essential tasks were completed, and the evening chores represented the final push in a day that began before dawn and continued without significant breaks. Remember that frantic race against darkness where you managed to secure your livestock before wolves turned them into an all-you-can-eat buffet? Well, now comes the medieval equivalent of a formal dinner party crossed with a survival challenge: supper by candlelight. You're about to discover why medieval evening meals were less about fine dining and more about not dying from food poisoning, where sharing cups was considered polite rather than horrifying, and where proper table manners involved wiping your hands on bread because napkins were apparently too fancy for people who regularly survived plague outbreaks. You enter the main hall carrying a flickering candle that provides about as much illumination as a modern cell phone flashlight, except this candle cost more than most people earned in a day and could set your entire house ablaze if you sneeze at the wrong moment. The evening meal isn't just about nutrition, It's about gathering the family together for the day's final social ritual, sharing news and gossip, and consuming enough calories to survive another night in a world where your body burns energy just trying to stay warm enough to avoid hypothermia. The table is set with wooden bowls that have absorbed decades of meals, creating a patina that would make a modern health inspector reach for the strongest available disinfectant. Your family's eating utensils consist mainly of knives that double as tools, weapons, and surgical instruments, because medieval people believed in multi-purpose equipment that could serve various functions depending on the day's emergencies. Forks haven't been invented yet, so you're eating with your hands, your knife, and whatever bread is available to serve as an edible utensil. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern food safety regulations. Medieval people routinely shared drinking vessels, eating utensils, and even food from common bowls, creating a communal dining experience that would horrify modern germaphobes but was considered the height of social bonding. Your family's shared cup isn't just practical. It's symbolic of trust, intimacy, and the kind of mutual dependence that kept medieval families together through crises that would destroy modern relationships. But here's the quirky detail that medieval dining historians love: the concept of sops, which were pieces of bread soaked in wine, broth, or other liquids and eaten as a delicacy. Medieval people had developed sophisticated techniques for combining bread with various liquids to create flavors and textures that modern cuisine has largely forgotten. Your evening meal includes sops that transform stale bread into something approaching gourmet dining, assuming you can ignore the fact that the wine might contain enough bacteria to kill a modern person. The food presentation would fascinate a modern chef, but not for reasons involving aesthetic appeal. Medieval cooks were masters of making limited ingredients stretch to feed entire families, creating dishes that maximize nutrition while minimizing waste. Tonight's supper includes a pottage that's been simmering all day, gradually absorbing whatever vegetables, grains, and meat scraps were available. This isn't just soup. It's a complex stew that represents the cook's ability to transform random ingredients into something that will keep the family alive until tomorrow. Your role during the evening meal involves managing the serving process, monitoring family dynamics, and ensuring that everyone receives appropriate portions based on their age, status, and contribution to the household. Medieval meals weren't just about eating. They were about reinforcing social hierarchies, sharing information, and maintaining the family bonds that provided security in an uncertain world. The bread situation deserves special attention because medieval bread was the foundation of every meal, but it wasn't the soft, preservative-laden product that modern people expect. Tonight's bread is dense, chewy, and requires serious jaw muscles to consume, but it's also packed with nutrients and flavor that modern bread has largely lost. You're using bread as plates, utensils, and napkins, creating a zero-waste dining experience that would impress modern environmentalists. The ale consumption during supper requires careful management because medieval beverages were significantly stronger than modern people expect, and maintaining family harmony while everyone is gradually becoming intoxicated presents challenges that would test a modern diplomat. The evening ale is stronger than the morning version, designed to help family members relax after a day of backbreaking labor, but it's also potent enough to turn family discussions into family arguments if consumption isn't carefully monitored. Historians still argue whether medieval people enjoyed their food more than modern people, given the absence of processed ingredients and the emphasis on seasonal, local produce. But one thing's certain, They appreciated every bite in ways that modern people, accustomed to abundant food supplies, can barely comprehend. Every meal was earned through hard work, every ingredient represented careful planning and resource management, and every bite was a small victory against the constant threat of hunger. The conversation during supper follows patterns that would surprise modern families accustomed to individual entertainment and private communication. Medieval families used mealtime to share news, discuss problems, plan future activities, and maintain the social connections that provided emotional and practical support. You're not just eating. You're participating in a family meeting that covers everything from tomorrow's work assignments to neighborhood gossip that could affect your family's social standing. The lighting situation creates an atmosphere that's both intimate and challenging. Your candles provide enough light for eating but not enough for detailed work or extensive reading. Medieval people had developed techniques for maximizing limited light sources, positioning candles strategically and using reflective surfaces to amplify illumination. But the evening meal still takes place in what modern people would consider inadequate lighting. But here's where medieval supper gets really interesting: the food preservation techniques on display. The meat you're eating has been preserved through salting, smoking, or other methods that allow it to remain edible for weeks or months without refrigeration. The vegetables have been pickled, dried, or stored in root cellars using techniques that modern people are rediscovering through the local food movement. Every item on your table represents sophisticated food preservation knowledge that kept families fed through long winters. The cleanup process that follows supper reveals the complex logistics of medieval household management. Dishes need to be cleaned using methods that don't involve running water or modern detergents. Leftover food needs to be stored using preservation techniques that prevent spoilage, and the dining area needs to be prepared for tomorrow's meals. You're not just cleaning up after dinner. You're managing a complex food system that requires constant attention and maintenance. The social dynamics of evening cleanup involve the entire family in ways that modern households have largely abandoned. Children learn responsibility through age-appropriate tasks. Adults share the workload based on their abilities and availability, and everyone participates in maintaining the household systems that ensure survival. Medieval families functioned as economic and social units where everyone had essential roles and responsibilities. Your evening meal is winding down, but the day isn't over yet. There are still evening chores to complete, children to settle for the night, and preparations to make for tomorrow's challenges. The supper has provided nutrition and social bonding, but it's also reminded you of the constant work required to maintain a medieval household and the complex social relationships that make survival possible in a dangerous world. Remember that candlelit supper where you successfully avoided food poisoning while maintaining family harmony despite everyone gradually getting tipsy on medieval ale. Well, now comes the part of your day that would make a modern person sleep with every light in the house blazing: nighttime rituals and fears. You're about to discover why medieval people developed such elaborate bedtime routines, where every shadow could hide a demon, every strange sound might herald your doom, and where your thin wooden walls provide about as much protection from the supernatural as a paper umbrella provides from a hurricane. The sun has completely disappeared, and your house is now illuminated only by the flickering flames of expensive candles that you're burning through at an alarming rate. Medieval darkness isn't just the absence of light, it's a thick, oppressive presence that seems to seep through every crack and crevice, bringing with it all the terrors that daylight keeps at bay. Your candles create dancing shadows that transform familiar household objects into menacing shapes that could be anything from a hanging coat to a lurking demon waiting for the perfect moment to snatch your soul. You begin the evening ritual of securing your home against the dangers that emerge after dark. This isn't just about locking doors. Medieval security involves a complex series of protective measures that combine practical precautions with spiritual defenses. You're checking shutters, barring doors, and ensuring that every possible entry point is secured against intruders who might be human, animal, or something far worse. Medieval people understood that nighttime brought dangers that required both physical and supernatural protection. The holy water you sprinkle around doorways and windows isn't just religious observance. It's practical insurance against the evil forces that medieval people knew lurked in the darkness. Your evening prayers aren't just spiritual comfort. They're essential protective rituals that create barriers between your family and the malevolent entities that hunt in the night. Medieval Christianity wasn't just about salvation. It was about daily survival in a world where supernatural threats were as real and immediate as wolves or bandits. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern security systems. Medieval people genuinely believed that demons, witches, and various evil spirits became more active after dark, and their nighttime rituals were designed to provide protection against supernatural attacks that could result in illness, death, or eternal damnation. Your bedtime routine isn't just about getting ready for sleep. It's about preparing for a night-long battle against forces that want to destroy your family's physical and spiritual well-being. But here's the quirky detail that medieval folklore enthusiasts love. Different types of supernatural creatures required different protective measures, and medieval people had developed elaborate systems for identifying and defending against specific threats. The iron horseshoe above your door protects against fairies, the rowan branches in your windows ward off witches, and the salt scattered across your threshold prevents demons from entering your home. Your house isn't just a dwelling. It's a fortress designed to withstand supernatural siege warfare. The sounds of the medieval night would terrify a modern person accustomed to the predictable noises of urban living. Every creak of settling wood could be footsteps. Every rustle of wind through thatch could be something climbing onto your roof. And every distant howl could be wolves, bandits, or creatures that don't appear in modern nature documentaries. Medieval people developed the ability to distinguish between normal night sounds and potential threats. But this constant vigilance created a level of nighttime anxiety that modern people can barely comprehend. Your children are particularly vulnerable during the dark hours, and medieval parents developed elaborate rituals for protecting their offspring from the supernatural predators that hunted children with particular enthusiasm. Little Margaret sleeps with a small iron cross clutched in her tiny fist. Thomas has protective herbs sewn into his nightclothes, and baby Anne's cradle is surrounded by charms and blessings that create a spiritual fortress around her sleeping form. The temperature drop that accompanies nightfall creates physical challenges that compound the psychological stress of medieval evenings. Your house, which was barely warm during the day, becomes genuinely cold as the fire dies down and the thin walls provide minimal insulation against the night air. You're layering on additional clothing, piling extra blankets on the beds, and trying to maintain enough warmth to survive the night without burning through your entire fuel supply. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually experienced more supernatural encounters than modern people or simply interpreted natural phenomena through a supernatural framework. But one thing's certain, Their nighttime fears were based on genuine dangers that could result in death, injury, or worse. Medieval nights brought real threats from human predators, wild animals, and environmental hazards that required constant vigilance and protective measures. The bedtime stories you tell your children aren't just entertainment. They're educational tools that teach important lessons about survival, morality, and the supernatural dangers that lurk in the darkness. Tonight's story involves a young girl who ignored her parents' warnings about staying out after dark and encountered creatures that would give modern horror writers nightmares. These stories aren't just folklore, they're survival manuals disguised as entertainment. But here's where medieval nighttime gets really interesting: the community aspects of protection. Your neighbors are also conducting their own evening rituals, creating a network of spiritual and physical defenses that protect the entire community from supernatural and human threats. Medieval villages functioned as collective security systems where everyone participated in maintaining the barriers that kept evil forces at bay. The prayers you recite before sleep are specific formulations that have been passed down through generations of people who understood the importance of spiritual protection during the vulnerable hours of sleep. You're not just asking for divine blessing, you're invoking specific protections against nightmares, demon attacks, and the various supernatural afflictions that could strike sleeping victims. Medieval prayers were practical tools for spiritual warfare rather than abstract expressions of faith. Your bedroom preparations involve more than just getting comfortable for sleep. You're positioning religious artifacts strategically around the sleeping area, ensuring that protective charms remain active throughout the night, and arranging the physical space to provide maximum security against both natural and supernatural threats. Medieval bedrooms were designed as defensive positions rather than comfortable retreats. The night sounds from outside your walls tell the story of medieval rural life after dark. You can hear the distant howling of wolves, the movement of nocturnal animals, and occasionally the sounds of human activity that could indicate anything from late-night travelers to potential threats. Medieval people developed the ability to interpret these sounds and respond appropriately to different types of nighttime activity. But here's the really challenging part: you need to balance protection against threats with the practical necessity of sleep. Medieval people couldn't afford to stay awake all night guarding against potential dangers, but they also couldn't afford to sleep so deeply that they missed genuine threats. You're developing the kind of alert rest that allows for recovery while maintaining awareness of your surroundings. The final preparations for sleep involve checking on family members, ensuring that protective measures remain in place, and conducting the last prayers of the day that will hopefully provide divine protection through the dangerous hours of darkness. You're not just going to bed, you're preparing for a night-long journey through a landscape of physical and spiritual dangers that require constant vigilance and divine intervention. The medieval night stretches ahead with its own challenges and terrors, but your family is as prepared as medieval knowledge and resources allow. The evening rituals have been completed, the protective measures are in place, and the prayers have been offered. Now comes the real test: surviving another night in a world where darkness brings dangers that modern people have forgotten how to fear. Remember those nighttime protective rituals where you basically turned your house into a medieval fortress against demons, wolves, and whatever else goes bump in the night? Well, now comes the part of your evening that would make a modern Netflix binge seem like amateur entertainment: bedtime stories and prayers. You're about to discover why medieval storytelling was less once upon a time, and more Here's how to avoid eternal damnation while learning practical survival skills. Where every tale contains enough moral instruction to make a modern self-help book seem shallow, and where family prayer time could last longer than most modern movies. You gather your family around the dying embers of the hearth, the last source of warmth and light before the long medieval night claims your household. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating the perfect atmosphere for stories that blend Christian morality with ancient folklore in ways that would fascinate modern anthropologists. Your children huddle close, not just for warmth but for the comfort that comes from family unity in the face of a world that's actively trying to kill them through various creative methods. Tonight's story involves a young maiden who ignored her parents' warnings about accepting gifts from strangers and ended up in a situation that required divine intervention, quick thinking, and the kind of moral fortitude that medieval people considered essential survival skills. This isn't just entertainment. It's educational programming that teaches children about the dangers they'll face, the importance of obedience to authority, and the consequences of moral failure in a world where bad decisions can result in eternal damnation. The storytelling tradition you're participating in represents thousands of years of accumulated wisdom, practical knowledge, and cultural values that have been passed down through generations of people who understood the importance of oral education. Your stories aren't just folklore. They're survival manuals disguised as entertainment, teaching children about everything from recognizing poisonous plants to understanding the social dynamics that could save or destroy their lives. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate modern children's literature. Medieval stories were designed to be simultaneously entertaining and terrifying, teaching children about real dangers while providing moral instruction that could literally save their souls. Your bedtime stories aren't just cute tales. They're comprehensive educational programs that cover theology, practical survival skills, and social behavior in ways that modern educational systems have largely abandoned. But here's the quirky detail that medieval literature enthusiasts love. Many of the stories you're telling tonight contain elements that are far older than Christianity, incorporating pagan folklore, ancient wisdom traditions, and cultural memories that stretch back to prehistoric times. Your Christian moral tales are built on foundations of ancient storytelling that medieval people adapted rather than abandoned, creating a rich tapestry of cultural knowledge that served multiple educational purposes. Little Margaret is listening with the kind of intense concentration that modern children reserve for their favorite video games, absorbing lessons about the importance of charity, the dangers of pride, and the practical skills needed to navigate a world where supernatural threats are as real as physical ones. Medieval children learned through stories that combined entertainment with education in ways that made learning both enjoyable and memorable. The moral lessons embedded in tonight's stories would challenge modern ethical philosophers. You're teaching your children about the complex relationships between individual desires and community needs, the importance of maintaining social harmony while standing up for moral principles, and the practical applications of Christian virtues in situations where survival depends on making the right choices under pressure. Your storytelling technique involves more than just reciting familiar tales. You're adapting stories to address current family situations, incorporating local events and personalities that make the moral lessons more relevant and immediate. Medieval storytelling was interactive and responsive, changing based on the audience's needs and the storyteller's understanding of what lessons were most important at any given time. The prayer session that follows storytelling represents the day's final spiritual exercise, where your family collectively acknowledges divine providence, requests protection through the dangerous night hours, and reinforces the religious framework that provides meaning and structure to medieval life. These aren't just rote recitations. They're genuine communications with divine powers that medieval people believed were actively involved in their daily survival. Historians still argue whether medieval people were more genuinely religious than modern people or simply more aware of their dependence on forces beyond their control. But one thing's certain. Their evening prayers were comprehensive requests for protection that covered everything from physical safety to spiritual salvation. You're not just praying, you're conducting diplomatic negotiations with supernatural powers that could determine your family's fate. The children's participation in evening prayers reveals the complex process of religious education in medieval households. Little Thomas is learning the Latin phrases that will connect him to the broader Christian community. Margaret is developing the devotional practices that will sustain her through adult challenges. And even Baby Anne is absorbing the rhythms and rituals that will shape her spiritual development. But here's where medieval bedtime gets really interesting: the integration of practical and spiritual concerns. Your prayers include requests for protection from specific threats that your family faces, gratitude for the day's successes and survival, and petitions for divine guidance in making the decisions that will determine tomorrow's outcomes. Medieval prayer was practical communication with divine powers rather than abstract spiritual exercise. The family bonding that occurs during evening storytelling and prayer creates emotional connections that provide psychological support through the challenges of medieval life. You're not just entertaining your children. You're creating shared experiences and cultural knowledge that will bind your family together through crises that would destroy relationships based on less substantial foundations. The educational aspects of evening family time would impress modern pedagogical experts. Your children are learning language skills through storytelling, developing memory techniques through prayer recitation, and absorbing cultural values through shared experiences that combine entertainment with instruction. Medieval families were comprehensive educational institutions that provided training in everything from practical skills to spiritual development. The social dynamics of family storytelling reveal the complex relationships within medieval households. Different family members contribute different elements to the evening's entertainment and education, creating collaborative experiences that reinforce family bonds while providing diverse perspectives on the stories and lessons being shared. Your role as the primary storyteller involves more than just entertainment. You're serving as educator, moral guide, cultural transmitter, and spiritual leader, helping your family navigate the complex challenges of medieval life while maintaining the values and knowledge that ensure survival and salvation. Medieval mothers were essentially running comprehensive educational programs that covered every aspect of human development. The transition from storytelling to prayer marks the shift from entertainment to serious spiritual business. The atmosphere becomes more solemn as your family prepares for the vulnerable hours of sleep, when divine protection becomes essential for survival through the dangers that emerge in darkness. Medieval people understood that sleep was a time of particular vulnerability that required special spiritual preparation. The final prayers of the evening include specific requests for protection from nightmares, demon attacks, and the various supernatural afflictions that could strike sleeping victims. You're not just asking for peaceful sleep, you're invoking divine protection against specific threats that medieval people believed were most active during the dark hours when human consciousness was diminished. The evening storytelling and prayer session is drawing to a close, but the bonds created through shared narrative and spiritual experience will provide strength and comfort through the night ahead. Your family has been educated, entertained, and spiritually prepared for the challenges that tomorrow will bring, creating the foundation for another day of survival in the medieval world. Remember those bedtime stories that were basically survival manuals disguised as entertainment, and prayers that functioned like diplomatic negotiations with supernatural powers? Well, now comes the final challenge of your medieval day, actually trying to sleep in a world where death could visit without warning, and where your thin straw mattress offers about as much protection from the night's dangers as a paper shield offers against a sword. You're about to discover why medieval people developed such elaborate sleeping rituals, where every creak could herald disaster, and where peaceful rest was less a given and more a minor miracle that required divine intervention. You extinguish the last precious candle, plunging your household into a darkness so complete that modern people, accustomed to the ambient glow of civilization, can barely comprehend its totality. This isn't just the absence of light, it's a thick, oppressive presence that transforms familiar spaces into alien landscapes where every shadow could hide threats that your imagination conjures with terrifying creativity. Your bedroom, which seemed reasonably secure by candlelight, now feels like a fragile shelter surrounded by unknown dangers that could breach your defenses at any moment. The settling sounds of your wooden house create a symphony of potential threats that would keep a modern person awake for weeks. Every creak of timber could be footsteps, every rustle of thatch could be something climbing onto your roof, and every distant sound could herald the approach of bandits, wolves, or creatures that exist in the shadowy realm between folklore and reality. Medieval people developed the ability to distinguish between normal house sounds and genuine threats, but this constant vigilance created a level of nighttime anxiety that modern security systems have largely eliminated. Your straw mattress, which seemed merely uncomfortable this morning, now feels like a collection of sharp objects designed by someone who had never heard of human anatomy. The straw has compressed and shifted throughout the day, creating lumps, valleys, and pressure points that make finding a comfortable sleeping position an exercise in medieval engineering. You're constantly adjusting your body, trying to find positions that don't result in immediate pain while avoiding the spots where the straw has worn through the fabric covering. Here's a mainstream historical fact that'll make you appreciate your modern mattress. Medieval people often slept sitting up or in semi-reclined positions, not by choice but because lying flat on their primitive bedding was too uncomfortable to sustain for an entire night. Your sleeping position is a compromise between comfort and practicality, designed to minimize pain while maintaining enough alertness to respond to potential threats that could emerge during the vulnerable hours of sleep. But here's the quirky detail that medieval sleep researchers would find fascinating. People often slept in multiple short periods rather than one long stretch, waking naturally during the night for what they called the watching time. This wasn't insomnia. It was a natural sleep pattern that allowed for prayer, meditation, and vigilance during the hours when supernatural and human threats were most active. Your interrupted sleep isn't a disorder. It's an adaptation to a world where constant awareness was essential for survival. The temperature in your chamber has dropped to levels that would make a modern person reach for additional heating, but medieval people had developed techniques for maintaining body warmth that relied on shared body heat, multiple layers of clothing, and the kind of physical conditioning that came from a lifetime of exposure to uncomfortable conditions. You're sleeping fully clothed, covered with every available blanket, and positioned to maximize warmth retention while maintaining mobility in case emergency action becomes necessary. Your family members are settling into their own sleeping arrangements around you, creating a network of mutual protection and shared warmth that medieval people understood was essential for nighttime survival. Little Margaret is curled against your side, Thomas is positioned where he can quickly respond to threats, and baby Anne is secured in her cradle with protective charms and blessings that create a spiritual fortress around her sleeping form. The sounds from outside your walls tell the story of medieval rural life after dark. You can hear the distant howling of wolves, the movement of nocturnal animals, and occasionally the sounds of human activity that could indicate anything from late-night travelers to potential threats. Medieval people developed the ability to interpret these sounds and respond appropriately without fully waking, maintaining a state of alert rest that balanced the need for recovery with the necessity of vigilance. Historians still argue whether medieval people actually slept better than modern people, given their physical exhaustion and absence of artificial stimulation. But one thing's certain: their sleep was constantly interrupted by concerns that modern people rarely face. You're drifting in and out of consciousness, monitoring your surroundings while allowing your body the rest it desperately needs after a day of backbreaking labor. Your dreams, when they come, are filled with the day's experiences and tomorrow's challenges, creating a mental landscape where practical concerns blend with spiritual anxieties and supernatural fears. Medieval people believed that dreams were communications from divine or demonic sources, requiring interpretation and spiritual response that could affect their waking decisions and spiritual well-being. But here's where medieval sleep gets really interesting: the community aspects of nighttime security. Your neighbors are also maintaining their own vigilance, creating a network of alert households that provide collective protection against threats that could overwhelm individual families. Medieval villages functioned as security systems where everyone participated in maintaining the vigilance that kept evil forces at bay. The prayer fragments that drift through your semi-conscious mind aren't just spiritual comfort. They're active protection against the nightmares and supernatural attacks that medieval people believed were most likely to occur during sleep. You're maintaining spiritual defenses even while unconscious, creating barriers between your family and the malevolent forces that hunt in the darkness. Your body is finally beginning to relax despite the uncomfortable conditions and constant low-level anxiety that characterizes medieval sleep. The physical exhaustion from the day's labor is overwhelming your discomfort and fear, allowing you to drift into the kind of rest that will provide enough recovery to face tomorrow's challenges. Medieval people learned to sleep despite conditions that would challenge modern endurance, developing the ability to rest while maintaining awareness of potential threats. The night stretches ahead with its own dangers and challenges, but your family is as prepared as medieval knowledge and resources allow. The protective rituals have been completed, the spiritual defenses are in place, and the physical security measures provide what protection is possible in a world where safety is always temporary and survival depends on constant vigilance. Your breathing is slowing, your muscles are finally releasing the tension that has accumulated throughout the day, and your mind is beginning to let go of the constant calculations and concerns that define medieval consciousness. Sleep is coming, despite the discomfort, the anxiety, and the very real dangers that lurk in the darkness beyond your thin walls. The medieval night is claiming your household, bringing with it the promise of rest and the threat of dangers that emerge when human consciousness retreats. Your family is settling into the vulnerable state of sleep, protected by prayers, charms, and the kind of faith that medieval people developed through daily confrontation with mortality and uncertainty. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new dangers, and new opportunities for survival in a world that tests human endurance in ways that modern people can barely imagine. But for now, you're drifting into the kind of exhausted sleep that comes from a day spent in constant struggle against forces that could destroy everything you love. The darkness is complete, the house is settling into its nighttime rhythms, and your family is beginning the journey through sleep that will hopefully deliver you safely to another dawn. Medieval sleep wasn't just rest. It was an act of faith in a world where waking up was never guaranteed and every morning was a small victory against the forces of chaos and destruction. Your breathing deepens, your awareness fades, and you surrender to the sleep that your body desperately needs. The medieval day is finally ending, but the night holds its own challenges and mysteries that will test your family's survival skills in ways that daylight never could. Sleep comes at last, bringing dreams filled with the day's struggles and tomorrow's hopes, carrying you through the dangerous hours of darkness toward another chance at survival in the medieval world. And so your medieval day draws to its close, settling like dust over the ancient rhythms that have governed human life for countless generations. The candles have flickered out, the prayers have been whispered into the darkness, and your family sleeps fitfully on straw that rustles with each breath, each movement a small reminder of the simple miracle of surviving another day. Feel your own breathing slow as you imagine the weight of those rough woolen blankets, the way the cold night air touches your face while your body seeks warmth beneath layers of cloth that smell of smoke and honest labor. The sounds of the medieval night fade into a gentle murmur, the distant call of an owl, the settling of wooden beams, the soft breathing of children who have learned to sleep despite dangers that would terrify modern minds. Let yourself drift with the knowledge that tomorrow will bring its own challenges, its own small victories, its own moments of beauty found in the midst of struggle. The medieval woman whose day you've shared understood something that modern life often obscures, that survival itself is a form of grace, that each dawn is a gift, and that the simple act of caring for those we love is perhaps the most profound human achievement. Rest now in the understanding that strength comes not from comfort but from endurance, not from ease but from the daily choice to continue, to care, to hope despite uncertainty. The medieval darkness that once seemed so threatening now wraps around you like a gentle blanket, carrying you toward dreams where the struggles of the day transform into the quiet satisfaction of work well done, love freely given, and another day survived in the endless human story of resilience and hope.